It's been the political spoiler for the Abbott government in its early days in office. A scandal over MPs' expenses. Just how far should MPs go, or are they allowed to go, in spending the taxpayers' money? It's engulfed the Prime Minister himself. Examples just seem to keep on coming out. And Jonathan Swan, who's been hot on the trail of this story all along, has another today that's quite remarkable. Thanks for coming into Breaking Politics, Jonathan. Tell us what you know.
Well, so far, Prime Minister Tony Abbott has managed to ignore this expenses, all these revelations that are coming out. He's basically said that there's no problem with the current system. There will always be things around the edges, problems around the edges, but basically he's not proposing any changes. Today's example, I think, really puts him under a lot more pressure to look at the system and do something about it. It involves one of his own MPs, the Liberal MP for Canning in Western Australia, Don Randall. Now, what we've found with Don Randall is that he's spent more than $10,000 of taxpayers' money on questionable travel, and he's spent about $2,500 on books that have bear no resemblance to parliamentary or electorate or official business.
What kind of books?
Broadway musicals, show by show, Animals, a child's encyclopedia, movie box, multiple copies of the Guinness Book of Records, 6 copies of Peter Fitzsimons' Batavia, cookbooks, the Australian Women's Weekly Cookbook.
Taxpayers
paid for all this, and the rules state that they need to be related to parliamentary, electorate or official business. But probably the most concerning thing we've found in Mr Randall's expenses is a trip to Cairns last November. Now, this trip cost taxpayers more than $5,000. Mr Randall flew to Cairns on November the 18th with a family member. He claimed it in his form as electorate business. Now, the definitions of electorate business are vague. You don't necessarily need to be in your own electorate, which is in WA, so the fact that he was on the other side of the country is not of itself a problem, but you would hope that there is a justification for something that is at least tangentially related to his electorate. Now, what we found was that a week after his trip to Cairns, Mr Randall updates his members' interests register to say that, quote, "My wife and I have taken possession of the house at the Cairns location. We intend to rent the house as an investment."
Right, so in a completely separate process, he was declaring the fact that he had an investment property in Cairns.
Correct.
While also claiming the airfares that flew him across the country.
Him and a family member.
Right. What do we know about the trip that he took at taxpayers' expense and its relationship to that property?
Well, we asked him. We asked Mr Randall's office about 10 questions yesterday, detailed questions about these expenses. We gave him every opportunity to deny that it was linked to his Cairns investment property. We asked him to explain what the electorate business was that brought him from Western Australia to Cairns. They declined to comment. They declined to respond to any of our questions. I spoke to his office numerous times yesterday. We had email contact, and the final email was, "Thank you, but no comment." Now, there's also a trip to Melbourne for sittings of Parliament on a Saturday.
When Parliament sits in Canberra on weekdays.
Indeed. The trip was him and a family member, about $5,000 again. The family member flew to Melbourne for the Saturday, flew back to Perth. Mr Randall makes his way to Canberra for the sitting week on Monday. But we asked him how he could justify sittings of Parliament in Melbourne on a Saturday. Again, no comment.
Because, of course, with a West Australian MP, you would expect their travel expenses to be high. You would expect, because they're on the other side of the country from the federal parliament. But these appear unexplained cases which don't fit with the ordinary pattern that you'd expect the taxpayer to pay.
Well, they don't appear unexplained, they are unexplained, and we gave them every opportunity to explain them in as explicit terms as possible. And this is why I come back to what I said at the start, which is I'm not sure that how much longer the Prime Minister can ignore this And I'm not sure that as a media strategy, simply ignoring allegations that, in my view, are pretty serious, involve more than $10,000 worth of taxpayers' money, more than $2,500 of books that bear no obvious relation, and no comment is the response.
OK, now to close, journalists, of course, very often do not want to divulge their sources, but in this case you're willing to. Tell us.
Well, we've been doing a bit of an experiment which has been incredibly encouraging. We've asked our readers to help us investigate politicians' entitlements. We've got a bit of a mechanism online where they can go and look through the entitlements and check out their local MP and say, hey, what do you think about, such and such's trip to Margaret River? And we will have a look at it. And this has been incredibly useful to us. This story came from 2 readers. Both of them noticed discrepancies in Mr Randall's expenses, and we followed them up. So
the message is, if you think your local MP's using taxpayers' money with a bit too much flair, Jonathan's keen to hear from you.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, my message is just go and check out your local MP. Just go and look through their expenses, click on our link, and if you see anything that you think looks a little bit unusual, I'm waiting to hear from you.
Jonathan Swan, as always, we're grateful for your time on
Thanks,
Breaking
Tim.
Politics.